We have delegation number 1, Cam Scott, who is participating remotely to be heard with respect to report number 2. Cam Scott, if you could mute your live stream feed and unmute your audio and video. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. You may begin.
Wonderful. Thank you. I understand I have 10 minutes. I'll set a timer. My name is Cam Scott, and I'm here as a concerned community member and on behalf of Police Free Schools Winnipeg, an advocacy group for healthy, equitable, fully funded, and police-free schools. In a section of his report to the Police Board on community partnerships, Chief of Police Danny Smythe speaks directly to the School Resource Officer program. Established in 2002, this program maintains an armed police presence in school divisions across the city to, and I'll quote the Chief's report, enhance neighborhood safety, strengthen relationships between the police and students, develop proactive and collaborative crime prevention strategies, and reduce costs to the justice, education, and social service system, end quote. Smythe reiterates the program's objectives and appears to claim this program as an unqualified success. I intend to speak to these claims this morning, but first I want to acknowledge the larger context of this conversation. As we speak of this increasingly controversial program today, cities across Canada, Toronto, Hamilton, Vancouver, and Edmonton this very month are voting to divest from heavy-handed and demonstrably harmful approaches to school health and safety, faced with evidence of widely differential outcomes for racialized students, in particular Black and Indigenous students, amid conspicuous shortfalls in public school budgets, which foot the larger part of the bill for unwarranted police presence, in our view. In Winnipeg, a growing chorus of disapproval for this program has forced the police to mount a defense of its aims and outcomes. We feel they have very little to show for it outside of some PR opportunities and the positive appraisal of administrators, who seem all too happy to offload behavioral issues onto a branch of the criminal justice system. At minimum, this seems negligent on their part. In stronger terms, we see it as facilitating harm to students from over-policed communities instead of offering real counseling and support. So I'm here to speak of the SRO program as an example of costly, ineffective, and dangerous overreach on the part of the Winnipeg Police Service. On July 23rd, City Council deferred a motion to vote on a new SRO program agreement, deciding that a number of last-minute additions to the contract, including clauses that would increase the chief's own power over the program, had not been adequately debated. This motion returns to the table on September 30th, but in our view, it still hasn't been adequately debated because the negative effects of police presence in schools on marginalized students has not been taken into proper consideration. So I'd like to take this opportunity to address some of the claims for the program in this report. The WPS claims that it strengthens relationships in order to prevent crime with an emphasis on early intervention activities. For us, early intervention wouldn't mean profiling potential criminals. It would mean offering social supports, employing counseling and addiction specialists, creating breakfast programs, funding community resources, and deepening anti-racist and decolonial curriculum. It doesn't mean preemptively policing low-income and racialized communities in a place of learning on suspicion of delinquency or worse. Many incidents in school, minor incidents that would not otherwise result in a police report or criminal charges, are escalated by police involvement, which forces youth into contact with the law and can actively discourage students from over-policed communities from attendance and participation. So our website collects frankly horrifying stories of police conduct in schools, describing anything from the physical mishandling of students to the psychological effects of armed men on traumatized youth from refugee communities. Regardless of how one feels about the role of police in society, it's difficult to read these stories and not feel at a gut level that something is seriously wrong. A police presence actively drives marginalized students away from the school environment, placing them further from the meaningful social support that could truly prevent encounters with the law. When police were removed from schools in Toronto, suspensions fell by 24%. Expulsions fell by more than half. These are staggering figures. And Winnipeg is proudly growing this program while major cities Canada-wide are divesting. Inspector Bonnie Einerson has claimed that the point of this program is to keep youth out of the justice system. But unless children have started arresting and charging themselves after behavioral episodes, this is a nonsensical defense of police presence, which imputes criminality to young people after a profile that is very often bluntly racist in implication, if not in intent. So the chief's report portrays this as a crime-fighting program, policing children in a place of learning, but it doesn't square with some of the claims about the official face of the program. When we hear from administrators, they speak of the SRO program as a friendly facet of the police to encourage questions, to facilitate educational opportunities, to mildly intervene in bullying, and more or less fulfill benevolent counseling roles for which police are notably untrained. As I've stated above, we think that the presence of an armed and uniformed officer has a traumatic and exclusionary effect on marginalized students. But we've been told again and again by administrators that the active policing of students isn't the job of the school resource officer. So what is really going on here? Is this friendly PR or a further infiltration of already over-policed communities by way of public schools? From where we stand, it looks like an expansion of police power to no educational benefit paid for from the school budget. In the last school year, divisions paid almost $883,000, and the provincial government paid $552,000 to operate SRO programs in Winnipeg schools. The almost $500,000 that the Winnipeg School Division alone spent on 9 armed officers could have paid for a breakfast program for all of the division's kindergarten students. When Smythe claims that the SRO program reduces costs to the justice system, is he referring to the offloading of police expenses onto the school budget? We can't see how increasing people's contact with the criminal justice system is decreasing costs to the courts and carceral system either. But the costs to that system are not our priority. Our priority is the welfare of children, staff, students. Smythe cites broad approval for SRO programs from parents and teachers, including a report from Kaplan Research for the Winnipeg School Division. Now, it's true that these reports portray a largely positive feeling toward police in schools, and Smythe quotes some of these good impressions. But if you look more closely at the report, it ultimately finds that, and I quote, "Students who reported feeling very safe inside their schools were most likely to report that having SROs in their schools makes them feel safer, while students who experienced schools as already unsafe places mostly felt that SROs made no difference or made things significantly worse." So I'll repeat, students who already feel safe felt safer, and students for whom school feels unsafe felt even more so. This redundancy reveals a serious flaw in the report's approach. The positive opinion of a majority who themselves have small or favorable interactions with the police is irrelevant, in our view, to assessing the harm caused by police presence to marginalized people. Positive anecdotes do not contradict or even counterbalance the negative impacts when those impacts are due to prejudice. The Kaplan report polls the entire student body, only to find that people who are little policed have no problem with policing. Equity-based reports carried out in Toronto centered the voices of Black and Indigenous people and people of color who are repeatedly profiled by police and painted a very different picture. Policing outcomes and interactions, as we all know, vary widely by race and class. And we are asking the police board, as it purports to be an instrument of direct accountability, to take this reality into consideration, to request the suspension of the school resource officer program until such time as a community-led, equity-based review can bring the voices of Black and Indigenous students to the center of this conversation. We're confident that that will result in the end of the program altogether, because if marginalized students feel unsafe around police in schools, the program has already failed. That's all I have to say today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for your presentation, Cam. Does the board have any questions with respect to his presentation? Not at this time. Ali? Edna? I just want to just provide a little bit of context in terms of my own personal experience with the school resource officer role. Earlier in my career, when I was with the provincial government and Department of Family Services, I had the opportunity to volunteer some of my lunch hours for 2 to 3 years, along with a person who was a sergeant with the Winnipeg Police Service at the time, and another individual that was running some programs for Child and Family Services. We volunteered our time at one of the high schools in the downtown area. This was a high school that saw a lot of newcomers, whether they were immigrants to our city or part of the refugee community that ended up here in our city. And we would volunteer, and I believe this is our Wednesday lunch hours for 3 years to create a stay in school program, provide mentorship to a lot of these individuals that were from racialized communities, predominantly either Caribbean or African communities. We did also have some that were European that again ended up here in Winnipeg, and were struggling to find their way, coming at later ages or later stages in their life, in high school, maybe struggling with language and not fitting in the way other students did within the school context. The time that we spent with those individuals, and I did mention that one of them was a sergeant with the police service. It's interesting that of the kids that are now adults that remember those interactions, largely remember the officer that was there. More so because he became chief of police, but also the fact that he was a police officer. Me, not so much. I did have a few that from time to time meet me in public context and say, you were the one that came to our school back in the day, and I remember the stay in school program and the words that you were able to provide that helped me stay in school and helped me fit in. So there is value to the relationships that are built where we can work directly with students, or police have the opportunity to work directly with students to build positive relationships in racialized communities. And those opportunities shouldn't be lost in the sense of there are individuals that in high school, education is not their focus, let's say. But where positive relationships can be built, and some of those individuals, we were able to establish work programs for them, that they got jobs in banks or working on the weekend in grocery stores. And we're able to facilitate some of those opportunities. And to this day, as I said, there are some that do meet back with us, recall the volunteer time that we provided to them in schools, but more so the individual that was the police officer, again, the positive relationships that they were able to build and cement with him throughout those years have led to their positive outcome in life to date. Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Scott. Excuse me. Mr. Scott, have you ever sat down in a school presentation that is in a presentation that is given to by a school resource officer? Have you ever spent a few hours with a resource officer walking around in the school?
I have attended presentations in schools by police officers, but I don't think they properly would have been SROs.
What do you mean by that?
Like police presentations at assembly.
Yeah, police presentations when they come into schools are given by police officers.
Oh yes, but I don't think that this would have been before the school resource officer program existed. There were not police in schools when I attended, and I do not work in a school, though I have worked with
No,
children.
no, I realize that. But since 2002, have you sat down and experienced a presentation given by a police resource officer?
I have not.
So basically, your information is just coming from reading material, speaking
Students
to other
and
people.
students and teachers.
Okay, fair. But until you've actually sat down and listened to a presentation and or walked around with that police resource officer for the afternoon or the morning that they spent in middle school or elementary school or high school, can you really say that it's not a good thing? I was a middle school teacher for over 32 years, and I sat through many a resource officer presentation. And to be quite honest with you, some kids took it very seriously, some kids didn't. But that's normal when it comes to a middle school student. But as Councillor Chambers said, they do remember that police officer later when they see him on the street, or as in our former police chief, Devon Clunas, because, and I refer to that because Devon Clunas, when he was a rookie cop, came to my school quite often. And the kids were super impressed that, wow, this cop who came, spoke to us, eventually became chief of police. And they looked up to him. So I disagree. I think school resource officers are important for our youth. They need somebody to look up to. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing.
May I speak to that for one more moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that. I think that the content of the presentations, we've heard things about faltering and fairly innocuous presentations, and I haven't attended one myself. I think that our assessment is more holistic in the sense that we are emphasizing the unseen effects, not so much what is imparted in those presentations as the way that a police presence is driving away people who you may not even see there from over-policed communities with familial and personal trauma around policing. And that's an unseen implication of that presence. Where people remembering the presence of the officer is concerned, it's a very imposing station in our society. And there are as many people who are terribly impressed by police officers as are very frightened. And we believe that those who are frightened have good cause to be so. And that's a problem that often manifests unseen effects and affects students' comfort level in school. We don't deny that there are positive interactions and outcomes, and we're glad for the people who feel positively about their own interactions. We don't want anyone to feel harassed or frightened in any respect in any part of their life. But the substantive content of the presentations is not so much our concern as the associations of people with trauma around policing who are vulnerable to police when they see an armed presence in the schools. And that'll be the last thing I say today.
Thank you very much for those follow-up words. Ali, did you have one more thing?
Couple things.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, a couple things. School resource officers don't come in fully armed. I'm kind of shocked by that word. And also, Mr. Scott, in your first few lines of your rebuttal, you've said a word that really strikes something in my heart. You said, you've heard. Okay, you've heard. Awesome. but until you've experienced, that would be more credible. So if you can change your word from we've heard to we've experienced. So go in there, sit down, talk to the school resource officer, listen to his presentation, and then sit down with those students and talk to them to see how they got that, what they got out of that presentation. So in my opinion, you need to take that word heard to experienced.
Thank you. Yeah, we do have to wrap this session up as we've got other delegations to be heard. I do appreciate what you've said there, Ali, as again, in the context of my time working in the schools, all three of us who were immigrant kids or had come to this country as immigrants were able to share our lived experience as immigrants to those kids who were also here as immigrants or refugees and struggling to find their way of how to fit in. And seeing that, again, the police or constable or Sergeant Clunas at the time, myself, who had worked with the provincial government after graduating from university, and the other gentleman also from Jamaica that worked with Child and Family Services. All three of us were immigrants and had aspired to careers here in our city, which we were able to do. It did leave a positive impact on those kids that, again, they were able to aspire to opportunities that they couldn't conceive of previously. So again, thank you for your input, Ali. Thank you for your input, Cam. We're going to move on to the next delegation.